sanctuary today for our Bible study. I want to throw a question at you. We are, just Ryan and I today, the traffic in Dunn is literally insane. You can't get from one side of the city to the other without it taking you about an hour. So we invited folks to watch from home today. I hope you're finding us on Facebook or our website. Enjoy this Bible study today with us. Ryan and I were talking here, and we're going to dive into Proverbs chapter 2. But I want to ask you this question as we get started. What is wisdom? May seem like a simple question. May seem like a complex question, because if I were to actually ask you to define wisdom, I wonder what you might say. In fact, maybe you want to go ahead and type it in the chat. What do you think wisdom is? What is wisdom? Well, Proverbs is helping us think through wisdom. We've been talking about that for a couple weeks now. And today, Proverbs is going to tell us a little bit more about wisdom, what it is, what it means, and how it works. Second question that I want to throw at you today is a question that we get in the book of Proverbs and other books in the Bible like Proverbs, Psalms, the book of Job, for example, and Ecclesiastes even. And it's a question that runs at the heart of what it means to be a person of faith in the world, to believe in a good God and how we are to live and follow after that God, but then wondering about all the bad things, the evil stuff in the world, right? So do bad things happen to good people? Do bad things happen to godly people is a question that Proverbs is going to throw at us today, and it's going to have an answer for us. May or may not be satisfying, so you'll have to let me know what you think about that. But we're going to dive into the book right now, dive into the text. So Ryan actually just shared with me a great translation. So would you actually mind reading from the New English translation, Ryan? Proverbs chapter 2.
Not at all. Want me to read the whole thing?
Yeah, let's go to the whole.
All right.
We're going to run through the whole chapter, but we're going to really focus on just part of it. I want you to listen as you hear it being read, especially for how this is working. You're going to hear some if and then. So listen for any if or sort of do these things, and then this will happen, then this will happen. Listen for those, and then listen for any, in particular, any contrasts between these people and those people, or between this or that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, go for it.
Proverbs chapter 2 from the New English translation. My child, if you receive my words and store up my commands inside yourself, by making your ear attentive to wisdom, and by turning your heart to understanding. Indeed, if you call out for discernment, shout loudly for understanding. If you seek it like silver, and search for it like hidden treasure, then you will understand how to fear the Lord, and you will discover knowledge about God. For the Lord gives wisdom, and from his mouth comes understanding and knowledge. He stores up effective counsel for the upright, and is like a shield for those who live with integrity. To guard the paths of the righteous, and to protect the way of his pious ones. Then you will understand righteousness and justice and equity, every good way. For wisdom will enter your heart, and moral knowledge will be attractive to you. Discretion will protect you. Understanding will guard you.
Let's actually stop right there, because that's through verse 11, and that's really where we're going to focus in on today. We are going to check out 12. We'll read maybe 12 through 19 or 22 before we go today, but because I do want to make at least point us to that. But you've got something going on here, and if you noticed, it's really good in the translation that Ryan read today. If you're reading at home from maybe NIV or NRSV or certainly King James and others, you're going to have a harder time finding that if. You're probably going to see the thens, but they're very clear in the translation that Ryan read. What's interesting about this, even as we get started, as I noticed, if you think back to last week, we talked about wisdom calling to us from the streets. Like wisdom was personified as a lady who's out in the streets calling for your attention. Like, pay attention to me, listen to me, heed my words. And so we get that in chapter 1. We're supposed to listen. We need to find, and we know that wisdom is out there seeking for us. What will we do? Will we answer that call? But here in chapter 2, it sort of turns the tables a little bit, and it invites us to go out and do the same thing that wisdom is doing in a way, right? My child, accept my words, store up my commands, turn your ear towards wisdom, stretch your mind towards understanding. I'm reading from CEB right now. Call out for insight, cry aloud for understanding, seek it like silver, search for it like a hidden treasure. We're encouraged to do exactly what wisdom did in the first chapter, which is get out in the streets and start seeking, start searching, find it, call out for wisdom and understanding. You know, if you're looking for something, you're probably not going to find it unless you actually start getting on your hands and knees and looking, like doing something to find it. If you're in, I was thinking about this. If you're in a store, I remember as a really small child, I was probably, 4 years old, and this was up in Garner, at where if you know where the Lowe's is in Garner, it used to be a Kmart. We used to go there for ices. That was the place to go get your ices when I was a young child. Anyway, I remember being in this Kmart with my mom one time, and you know how they'd have those circle racks of clothes?
Yep.
And I just, as a kid, I loved to go get in the middle of those and hide. So I did it one time, and my mom can't find me. And here I am just hiding in these racks of clothes. Mom, if you're watching, she probably remembers these happening a lot. But and so if you're a parent and you've got this child like me in the store who's hiding in all the clothes racks, you're not going to find the child unless you do what?
See. Mm-hmm.
You got to call their name.
Yeah.
Jason, where are you? Right? You've got to get out there. You've got to walk around, and you've got to call. You've got to invite the lost thing to come. You've got to seek it out, and you've got to look for it, and you've got to cry aloud. Just like here in verse 3, call out for insight. Cry aloud for understanding. Seek it like you would seek silver. Now, I've mentioned before, I can't remember if I mentioned this last week or not, but in the book of Job, and I want to say it's about chapter 28, there's some beautiful imagery of seeking wisdom like miners who are digging their tunnels into the earth and pulling earth out in order to find those precious gems, gold and diamonds and rubies and other precious metals and gems. And the image is trying to help us understand what it is to go and seek God's wisdom. It's not a passive activity. You don't simply go into a church building and listen like we do on Sunday mornings, right? It's active. If you're going to go and you're going to listen, then you got to pull out your Bible and you got to open it up and you got to dig into the text and you got to look up the footnotes. You've got to study. You've got to dig it. You've got to mine it. You've got to pull out 3 or 4 other books that might help you to understand that. Whether it's a commentary or a book on a book of the Bible, for example. Maybe you look up a podcast. Maybe you do a Google search to try to understand what you're reading a little bit more. It's an active search. And I think that's so important. So often these days, I think we want to take stuff in a very passive way.
Yeah, it's like it's a lot easier just to sit back and receive than it is to join with God, to be like wisdom, to be growing, like mimicking the Lord in this active way. And it always reminds me of, what Jesus said, seek and you'll find.
Like you mentioned that sort of that image reminded me, I've got my mug here. I always have my coffee mug. I'm not simply an open vessel for you to pour information into, right?
Yeah.
we have those images, and there's something to that. But what Proverbs and what Job are saying is that no, you're not just this passive vessel to be filled with something. That you have a role in your growth, in your development, in your spiritual maturity, and you've got to be like one of these miners. You've got an active part to play in your growth, in your development, in the way that you gain wisdom and understanding. Mm-hmm. So there's certainly that's in this song. We're encouraged to call out for wisdom, just like a parent searching out for their child in the grocery store or the clothing store. I want to also point this out. Passage starts out, my child, turn your ear to wisdom, stretch your mind, call out, cry out, seek, search. A couple weeks ago, I invited you to think about the verbs that you see in the book of Proverbs. You're going to see a lot of seek, search, cry out, call out, stretch. Those kinds of things are going to be throughout this book. They imply that active looking that we were just talking about. But I want you to pay attention to what the parent is inviting the child to do here. Notice that it's not, my child, be like me. My child, do what I do. My child, grow up and take on my vocation. Do the same job that I'm doing. It's none of that. It's turn your ear to wisdom, stretch your mind to understanding, call out for insight, cry out for understanding, seek it like silver, search it like a hidden treasure. In other words, Proverbs is telling us that the goal of a good parent is about helping your child to grow in learning and understanding, as we're going to see, about treating people well. Hang on to that. We're going to get there. Not about just doing what I say, but about seeking after something. And that something here is identified as wisdom and understanding. And we're going to learn more and more about that. But I want you to hold on to that. What does it mean to be a good parent? And what is Proverbs telling us about that good parent? What does a good parent do? How does a good parent act? So let's kind of dig into this a little bit. I mentioned to you, look at the ifs and the thens as we're reading this chapter. And so you noticed the first if comes right off at the beginning. I don't remember if it was there in the translation you read.
Mm-hmm.
Is it there in verse 1, Ryan?
Yeah, my child, if you receive my words.
There it is. If you receive this, if you store it up, if you turn your ear, if you stretch your mind, if you call out for insight, if you cry aloud, if you seek it, if you search for it. Mm-hmm. And then you get to verse 5. So all these verses, all these words in verses 1 through 4, they're all this if side of the equation. If, then. It's a conditional statement if you go back to your high school grammar class. Conditional statement. If you do this, then you can expect that this will happen.
It feels like to me, and it seems like to me, God's writing us this treasure map.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Right.
And we're on, he's like, God's sending us on a treasure hunt.
Absolutely.
And it's like, he's writing a map. If you turn this way, if you go here, if you go down to the stream, don't go to the left here, go right. And leading us to this incredible bounty of treasure.
So verses 1 through 4 kind of like directions.
Yeah.
Here's the directions. Yeah. Okay. So then we get to verse 5. I love that image. That's great. If we get to verse 5, there's the first then. So if you do this, if you do this, if you take the next turn, if you turn it right, then, okay, verse 5, what can we expect? You're actually going to find in this chapter 2 thens. One of them is verse 5. The second one is verse 9. And they're going to say 2 different thens. So we're going to look at what the difference is. The first one in verse 5, then you will understand the fear of the Lord. Now remember back to the past couple weeks, we've talked about how Proverbs will say over and over again, wisdom, the beginning of wisdom is fear of the Lord. So here you kind of have that again. If you do these things, then you'll understand the fear of the Lord. Because if you were like me and you're thinking about, well, the beginning of wisdom is fear of the Lord. Well, what is fear of the Lord? Mm-hmm. We've talked about it's not being afraid. It's not cowering and lacking courage. Rather, it's more about reverence and respect, right? We'll dive into that more throughout the book of Proverbs, but I don't want to give too much away too early. But so what is the fear of the Lord? Well, here, look, if you'll do these things, then you'll start to understand what fear of the Lord is a little bit better. So the treasure map is leading us to understand what fear of the Lord is. Second part of verse 5, and discover the knowledge of God. Find knowledge of God. There's something about these if statements that has to do with knowing God. That's the point. And wisdom here is related to God, right? So wisdom and knowing God are kind of going hand in hand here. Turn your ear to wisdom, then you'll know God. Wisdom and God are related. What's the relationship? Well, maybe we haven't parsed it all out yet, but we're going to get further and further down that track. Wisdom and God are related. To seek wisdom, according to this passage here, if you seek wisdom, right? If you turn your ear towards wisdom, then you'll know God. To seek wisdom is to seek God. I think that's significant and important and telling for us that we so often want to find God in all sorts of places that maybe have nothing to do with wisdom. Mm-hmm. We seek after God in all sorts of ways that might be entertainment minded, that might fill us with what we want, and we call it God, and none of it is very wise.
Yes. And we do. I think we do have that. Well, we have that ability. We have that a temptation, and maybe even that certain intrinsic issue to try to create God in our image.
In our image.
Our image, instead of recognizing that we are created in God's image, and that God is wanting to be revealed in this. God is desiring to be revealed, but just reading this over and listening to you talk about it, it seems that our participation is essential to God's revealing.
Oh, yeah.
And these certain ways, you know what I'm saying?
I think so.
Like God has drawn us in. He's like, no, you join me in this search. I'm right here. I can tell you about me, but you have to join in.
Yeah, it's not passive.
Yes.
So tie it back. Okay, so exactly what you said, and tie it back to the fact that this is a parent talking to a child. We said we're going to go back and forth between parent talking to a child or a sage talking to a pupil, because the same language was used for teachers and their pupils, masters and their students. But what does it mean? Go back to that question. What does it mean to be a good parent? If you do these things, seeking after wisdom, finding understanding, then you'll know God. What is the ultimate goal that this parent, this teacher, this instructor, this master is leading the child, the student, the pupil to? The ultimate goal here is first in this then statement in verse 5, to know God. And so I want to invite you all at home today to think about this. It begs a question for every one of us who's a parent or a teacher or a mentor of any kind. What kind of child are you raising? What do you want to raise? What kind of adult are you forming and shaping through this child or this student or this pupil in your life? You know, I was on Sunday morning. Now I don't like to be one of these old school guys who just complains about what people are doing during the 11 o'clock hour on Sunday morning. But I'm going to do that for a minute. Just to make a point, if you will. There's all kinds of times you can worship. It doesn't have to be just Sunday morning. But as I was driving through Anger and I passed Jack Marley Park on Sunday morning, man, the park was slam full of cars. And this is like 9 a.m. on a Sunday morning. And I'm like, heck on, some folks have gotten up and gotten out in order to be somewhere to do something. And they were at the ball fields. And I'm thinking to myself, I mean, my first thought, I'm headed to church because it is a traditional hour of learning, of growing, of giving ourselves, our hopes, our dreams, our concerns to God at this time of week when we don't have to work Monday through Friday, but we've reserved this day to give to the Lord. And man, that Jack Marley Park had more cars in it than any church that I passed on the way to our church that morning. And so I thought to myself, what kind of children are we raising? Do we want to raise athletes? Is that what we want? We just want athletes when they get older? Or do we want adults with wisdom and relationship and knowledge of God through Jesus Christ? Like, I think that parents, we've got to start asking ourselves that question. Who are we raising? What are our ultimate hopes and dreams for our children? And teachers at school should be asking yourselves the same thing about the two kids that you're teaching. What do you want? Do you want an athlete? Do you want a musician? Do you want someone wealthy? Is that your ultimate goal? Or do you want someone who is saved by the grace, the blood, the life, the witness, the mission, the testimony, the ministry of Jesus Christ? Who forever has a relationship with God? And if the answer is yes, I want my child to understand Jesus in a deeply. I want my child to have that relationship. I want my child to experience the daily saving grace of this relationship in their life. Then we need to be thinking about what we're doing with our children.
Yeah, and how to encourage our kids to grow in that way. Right? I mean, it's like, what are we teaching them? What are we encouraging them to do? Because if we're mimicking wisdom in this, the reason's not because I said so.
Because I said so.
Right? It's like it's not. It's identifying this internal motivation for our kids, because this is what you're going to get if you do it.
Don't do it because I said do it.
Yes.
I want you to discover the knowledge, the beauty, the understanding, the wisdom of this relationship with God. I want you to come to be motivated and to have that love inside yourself. Not because you think you have to, not because I told you to do it, not because everybody else is doing it, but because you can't not want to.
Yeah. And we can guide through this through our kids like God guides us. Hey, if you go this way, these things are going to happen.
Yeah.
And they're not going to be too pleasant. But then if you go this way, things are going to be more beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
But a fuller life.
Absolutely.
More happiness that comes from knowing the Lord and walking through this world in good, healthy ways.
Yeah. So there's depth to that. There's not just I'm dragging you to church and you have to. There's a constant awareness on the parent of how do I instill this love, this desire into my child. And Proverbs says, look, you do it it's active. You teach your child how to seek. You model to your child how to find. You talk to them about the value of this ongoing life journey to know and to understand what is beyond us. The divine, the God, our creator, our holy parent, our savior, our redeemer, our sustainer, more and more and more. We model that. We lead our kids into what that looks like. It's active. All this is great. This is great. Let's move on because we're going to run out of time really quickly. I want to point you to something that's kind of interesting here in verse 7. I've struggled to find a great translation for you. Actually, the one Ryan shared with me just a little bit ago does the best, and I didn't find that one before today, but I was reading an NIV and an NRSV and the Common English Bible, which I like a lot, but it certainly doesn't get everything right. No translation will. But in verse 7, what I have in the Common English Bible, he reserves ability for those with integrity. Now, I thought about this this morning a lot. I was like, what in the world? What in the world does that mean?
Not helping.
It's not helping me. So I went back to the Hebrew and I started to figure out, what are the words here? The verb here is about hiding. God hides or God stores something up over here. And first of all, what is the something that God is storing up? Well, the clearest, most translation from the Hebrew is sound wisdom. I don't even know ability. That's really interesting. He reserves ability in the Common English Bible. What did the translation you have say, Ryan?
This one has effective counsel and sound wisdom in the footnotes. Abiding success also in the footnotes.
You can always ask yourself, when you read different translations and you get so many different words for one word, what's going on? Well, here's what's going on in Proverbs. This word for sound wisdom, or you said effective counsel, or ability as in the Common English, it only occurs in the book of Proverbs. Nowhere else in the Hebrew Bible is this word occurs. Only in the book of Proverbs. So it's a unique word. It's not common at all. And so we don't have We often don't have a fuller grasp, a fuller understanding of it because it's so rare in terms of the Bible. But if we wanted to look at that word a little bit more, where it's trying to point us to is clear, proficient thinking, okay, as we go out in the world and use our power or ability, as in the Common English version, for dealing with really practical things in life, behaviors, and the things that we've got to do every day. So proficient, clear, sound thinking, wisdom on how we use our abilities every day in the everyday things that we do, the practical acts that we got to take every day, to live, to work with other people. Sound wisdom, that's what it's about. So God stores up this sound wisdom for who? Mine said for those with integrity. The word here really means at its very base level straight. Upright, sometimes we get it translated that way. Pleasing to God is another way that some translations will use. What it's about at its very basic level is a straight and level path. So it's often used for that. If you use this word in terms of a road, it would be a straight road, a level road, one that's not going to be hard to tread on. So the closest that I can get you to that today, who are these people? What does that mean? What does it mean to be straight? Think about the way we use the word crooked. If you call someone crooked, right, it's not a compliment, first of all, right? It means they do things that are evil, criminally minded, not good. Sketchy, yeah. They treat people in a way that's not great, right? Straight would be the opposite of crooked, and so we're talking about people who are straight shooters, right? They're going to treat people in a good, healthy way. Not crooked, but whole and well. They're going to treat people well. So that's kind of what we have here. God stores up sound wisdom, very practical wisdom on how we use our abilities in the world for people who are walking in this along straight lines and treating other people well. It's an interesting verse. And again, translations were kind of all over the place. But I wanted to parse that one out a little bit for you today. Because again, I think it's leading us to understand, to try to kind of see that, and if you look at verse 7 and 8 together, 8, he protects the paths of justice and guards the way of those who are loyal to them. What are these two verses together saying about that question that I gave you at the beginning? Do bad things happen to godly people? What does verse 7 and 8 say? No! God's protecting you. If you're good and you treat people right and you do all these great things and you follow after God and you search for wisdom and you seek for wisdom and you're doing all these things, God is going to protect you from all these harms. He's going to guard you. He's going to hold this wonderful wisdom for you, and you're going to have a grand store of it that you're going to have access to, and God's going to shield you in your life. And I think a lot of times we take this too far, for one. Thinking that nothing bad will ever happen to Christians. They're those who follow after God. I don't think that's wise, and I think it's taking this passage too far. But you have to be asking the question I'm already asking, right?
Yeah, and we all know it's not a zero-sum game. If they're out there, I don't know them, but there's very few people, especially godly people, who coast through life.
Yeah, right.
And float, and nothing bad ever happens to them.
If you're one of them, please put that you are in the chat, because I want to come learn from you. I don't know any either.
I mean, look at Jesus. Look at what happened. Great, never did anything wrong. And look what happened to him in the world. So God turned it into a blessing, of course. That's the type of God we have. But Proverbs, I read this somewhere when we were looking over things last week, but Proverbs seems to work in probabilities.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, I'm going to have a better chance of not being hurt if I don't choose to go play in traffic today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Right. Practical wisdom. To go back to the sound wisdom word, this is very practical.
Yes.
If you put good in the world, then you can expect some good back. But you can be certain if you put evil in the world, you're going to get some evil back, right? What goes around comes around.
Yeah, and the other type of wisdom literature, the practical stuff here, but the other type, I forget the word for it, but like in Job, where it almost turns the wisdom, it uses the wisdom tradition to look upon itself.
That's right.
And to search these deeper questions. Yes, well, I've been doing all this. but life still happened.
Yeah. To your point, the statistics. If you do good, statistically, good's going to come back to you. But there's always the exception. The exception doesn't take away the rule, right? The rule, the general rule that Proverbs is offering, I think is still something that's sound that we can rely on. But yeah, there's going to be exceptions. You're going to have to deal with some bad things that happen from time to time. And sometimes it's going to feel overwhelming because there are those moments where the oceans roar and life gets crazy. So there are those questions that are going to creep in our minds. Well, but okay, the wicked are going to fail and the righteous are going to prosper, as Psalms 1 says, very similar to this. But what about those evil folks who are prospering? And what about those really good people out there that are experiencing all these terrible things in life right now? That's the deep question. Proverbs isn't answering that. It's dealing with the statistical probability, to your point. But books like Job are going to ask those deep questions. Wait, have you considered my servant Job? What about this good person that all this bad stuff happens to? How do we understand that?
Yes.
So I want to point you to this. We want to take Proverbs and we want to make it the hard and fast rule that happens in every occasion. So to be Christian, to follow after God is going to give you the perfect life. Folks, I'm sorry. Probability-wise, yeah, I think you can expect more good from putting good in the world. If you follow God and you do what God is calling us to do, you can expect goodness. And still, bad things will happen to good people. And we're going to have to go to other books of the Bible to answer that question. This one's not going to do it all that much. It's going to focus on the statistic, the probability of goodness.
Yeah. And from a lot of those other books, we do see that in those times of turmoil that God is with us and God is forming us and God is making straight again and making whole the things that are broken.
And to that point, when we read God stores some stuff up, God shields us, God protects us, God guards us. In none of those cases in verse 7, although we are probably want to read those as protects us from all harm, shields us from all bad, it doesn't actually say that. It just says God is a shield. God protects. But perhaps the way God protects is by walking with us. Maybe the promise is presence, not simply no, nothing bad's going to happen to you. No. But when bad stuff does happen, you can be sure that God's presence is a shield about you. Yeah, it's going to be there. You're going to experience it. But the presence of God is going to shield you in a way that's beyond our understanding or our words. And so let's be careful how we read verses like 7 and 8, I think is what I want to encourage you to do. Don't take them to mean more than what they're saying.
Yes. And to recognize, and maybe God's protection in these circumstances was enabling us to come out the other side.
Yeah, absolutely.
And survive being in the fires and hanging on our cross for a bit and coming out a more like Jesus afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's dive into the last couple of verses, and then we're going to journey into our prayer time, and we'll invite you to join us on the conference call line. But verses 9 through 11, I promised you that in verse 9 you'd get the second then. Verse 5, the then was about knowing God. So what's the then about in verse 9, 10, and 11? So then, in verse 9, you will understand righteousness and justice and equity, all good things, right? These three things are all good things. What is this about? Well, if we keep reading, wisdom will enter your mind, knowledge will fill you with delight, discretion will guard you, understanding will protect you. What are all these things about? Righteousness, we've talked about that over the course of January. We've talked about that last fall. Righteousness being about the way we treat other people. Right relationships is just a good sort of easy definition for righteousness. Right relationships. Justice, the word in Hebrew mishpat, is about God's commands about how we're to go out in the world and live and treat other people. And then equity, fairness, of course. Equity is about there being this fairness between other people. Every one of these words has to do with our interactions, our engagements, our relationships with other people. So verse 5, 6, 7, and 8 about then knowing God. Verse 9, 10, 11, then you will know how to treat other people well, if I were to summarize it in a similar way, right? So not all about how to treat other people, how to engage, how to behave with other people, how to know other people well. So I think today we're going to pause at this point. We're going to dive more into this next week. We'll sort of finish chapter 2. The preview that I'll give you is if you look at verses 12 through 22, wisdom will rescue you from the evil path, from people who twist their words. They forsake the way of integrity and go on obscure paths. They enjoy doing evil, rejoicing in their twisted evil. Their paths are confused. They get lost on their way. Wisdom will rescue you from the mysterious woman, from the foreign woman with her slick words. She leaves behind the partner of her youth. She even forgets her covenant with God. Her house sinks down to death, and her paths go down to the shadowy dead. All those who go to her will never return. So you should stay on the path of good people, guarding the road of the righteous. Those who have integrity will dwell in the land. The innocent will remain in it, but the wicked will be cut off from the land, and the treacherous will be ripped up. Woo! You're getting some comparisons here. We'll dive into this more next week. But verses 12 through 15, talking about some people, in particular men. Notice that your translations, many of them don't say men, but the word there is men, not just people. Men who speak evil perversely, in verse 16 through 19, women who are strange and unknown and speak flatteringly of you, right? So beware of these things, and they're a personification in a different way. Earlier we talked about wisdom personified. Here something else is being personified in form of the men who speak perversely and women who speak flatteringly. What's all that about? Well, we'll dive into it next week, so you'll have to join us next Wednesday at 12 noon, and we look forward to seeing you then. For now, we invite you to join us on our conference call line. We'll turn that on here in just a minute. Whether you're watching from Facebook or YouTube or our website, you can call in, and we'll have a time of prayer together where we share our prayer concerns. We do that again over the prayer call line just so that we can keep any prayer requests private and secure. And if you are on Facebook or something now, you can certainly type those in the chat, but we welcome you to join us on free conference call line 563-999-1222, and we will see you there.